Hi there, friend. My name is John Werner. I used to be a part of the largest cult in the United States. After studying the Bible, Christian history, and ministry, I set my sights on confronting the problematic nature of white evangelicalism in the United States. In 2019, I published my first book as a first step in addressing the subtle issues of this complex system. This podcast will continue that work under the same title. Welcome to The Cult of Christianity. Welcome back to another episode of The Cult of Christianity. This is an exciting one for me because it's the first in-studio episode where I'm not coming from you remote. I'm at my good friend's house that I've known a very long time. His name's Jacob. Jacob, thanks for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me. I haven't been on a podcast ever, so this is a really fun experience to venture off and do something like this that I don't normally do. So thanks for the opportunity.
Oh, of course. And I know we hang out a lot and we've talked and I can tell that you've listened to a lot of the show, and it means a lot that you've listened and appreciate it. What brings you to the table today is quite literally was it your entire life you were raised in a private Christian school?
Yeah, that's correct. From preschool all the way to getting my undergrad, private institutions. Gotcha. Christian institutions, as a matter of fact, just being more specific.
Yeah. What? How? Just before you were 18, you've heard me ask this to a lot of people. How did you relate to Christianity the first 18 years of your life?
So it's pretty standard, just a Southern Baptist household in the South. So go to church. Obviously, very anti-alcohol. It wasn't completely sheltered. we're still allowed to enjoy other secular stuff. It wasn't completely shut off, but it definitely was a presence in the household of, not venturing off to certain sins and stuff that, normal Southern Baptists, abide by.
Yeah. So, how big was the church you went to growing up?
Well, without giving too much away, it's a very big church. It wouldn't take that much to figure out which one it is based off our general location, but still not going to mention it because I still have people that I know there. But yeah, definitely puts a different perspective when I go to smaller churches and stuff, seeing how different it is than congregations that have thousands of people. So but it's not always been that way because it's been growing because I've been going to the same church my whole life too as well. That's why it probably goes to my loyalty just in life in general. I stick to things because of my background, I would think. So it's just second nature to me, something I really don't think about because it's what I've always experienced.
Totally. And so in that vein, how do you relate to Christianity now?
So it'd be very different than in high school. So in high school, I was, just to give a little background, I was the worship leader in my high school. So was my older brother, which that was, just very interesting because we would have chapel every Wednesday. So all the people in high school, the whole high school would show up and, for lack of a better term, forced to do a service. So you had a lot of captive audience. A lot of people didn't want to be there. So it was kind of depressing at times because you were singing to people that really didn't care that you were trying to present something to them. But I always tried to make the best of the situation. Still was a great experience for me.
Well, so yeah, being kind of higher up and maybe seeing people disengaging from their environment, but nowadays, how do you relate to Christianity?
So nowadays, it's a little different. I still consider myself a Christian, but it's very different than the very hardline views I had in high school. Right now I've shared with you that I'm actually reading through the Bible. I'm towards the end of Exodus right now, so just trying to figure out what it means without an outside influence, because I think what your podcast really has spoken to is the vein of preachers using their platform to not really preach what's in the Bible. So personally, I'm let me just take all that out. I really don't attend church except on the major holidays, or if someone asks me to, I'll gladly go. But I just much prefer going to the source myself and researching and see what it actually does say, as opposed to someone's interpretation or, the sermon based off of a passage of scripture.
So would you say it's more personal now than it used to be? Did it feel more community or like family oriented when you were younger, and then maybe now it's more you figuring out your own beliefs, or is it more complicated than that?
I believe there's a touch of truth to that. I mean, still trying to figure. Obviously, I'm still on this journey trying to figure out, because with everything going on, you get the what came out with the Southern Baptist Convention with all the pastors and stuff. So I mean, it's really, you see one side of the church and it's not exactly what's actually happening in reality. So yeah, just really exploring that. So, but just, yeah, growing up, it was obviously go to church every Sunday, dress up nicely, and then obviously go to Sunday school beforehand too as well, which was nice. You get to, socialize with kids your age, which is always nice too, just on an unreligious note, which is still great for socializing. But just for now, I mean, if I'm being quite frank, I don't enjoy going to church. And there's a part of me just growing up that really didn't like going to church, but I wish I did. Kind of gives you like a sense of guilt. Like, why did I not enjoy this? I should be enjoying this. And so you just kind of put almost on a front, like, yeah, I'm enjoying, like, I'm on the outside, I'm enjoying this, but on the inside, like, when are we going to go eat lunch? So that's basically where I'm at now. And partially back then too, as well, the way I looked at it.
Yeah, so definitely can relate to the boringness of church and like the dread. I certainly, like, I don't know. Growing up, I felt very when I was younger, yeah, it was nice because that's where your friends were or whatever, and it was fun to hang out with them. But I remember specifically as a teenager, gosh, like, yeah, I went to a student tie church, and so putting on a tie at like 14 years old to like go to a building for 4 hours and just not have fun. It was not a good time. I wonder, did it feel even worse since you were like, going to like a private Christian school? Did it feel like, man, more of the same? Like did it ever feel like you couldn't get away from it?
Oh, absolutely. That's before this podcast, when I was just thinking about what I was going to talk about, definitely that was part of it. That's probably why now I don't go to church. Really, religion is not that big a part of my life. Like, most people that I hang out with wouldn't even think I'm a Christian, just because it's not. Because after all those years, like you said, just like, go to school, it's, Christian education, go to church. It's just like a breath of fresh air. It's like, I want to, talk about other things and enjoy other areas of my life, which, from a Christian standpoint, if I was talking to a Christian, it would sound terrible to them. But just being able to, explain that and say it to you, that just being my honest opinion on it. So.
Totally. Yeah. I can't imagine, because like I was homeschooled. And so there were certainly annoyances that came with, like, yes, I got Bible education at home, but I wasn't like around a lot of Christians all the time. Like I wasn't around, like even when I did do like did baseball or did other activities or was in my band, like I didn't have to be around Christians so much. And I feel like the idea of a private Christian school, like you're just around Christians Monday through Friday. Saturday, you're got your one day off from Christians, and then Sunday you're right back to it. That, especially when you're, young and like your attention can be on a million different things at once, it can kind of be like, I'm so sick of hearing the same thing over and over again. Like, I get it. Like, I've heard it.
Oh, I mean, that's 100% true, because your whole worldview is shaped around a very specific socioeconomic level of people you interact with. And, I mean, when I went to high school, it might be different now. I mean, it was probably 98% white. So, I mean, there's not a whole lot of diversity. So which kind of breeds, I wouldn't say racism, but it's just ignorance. You're just not used to being around people that are different than you. So it could, spur ideas in people, and you say ignorant things just because. And there was a big thing once I went to college, and I was around different types of people. And even now, my adult career, being in a city that has a lot of people coming in for work, and it gives you a whole bigger picture of the world that you didn't have growing up. Which, I mean, if you look at it, I mean, you can't really blame someone if you're around a certain group, and then like everything seems so foreign once you get outside of that circle.
I totally agree. I think there's like there's like a difference between like breeding hatred, which I think can happen in churches, especially certain kinds of churches. But more so than just like vitriol and hatred, a lot of what's bred is what you're talking about, ignorance. Like you're so contained to like one world, that looks at life a very particular way. I'm curious, because I don't know this. Have you ever been for any amount of time to churches that weren't Southern Baptist?
Not really. I used to date a girl back in college, and she was a part of a Southern Baptist church, which was like a small town one, which is even completely different, even in the same denomination, when you just have a pastor and a congregation of like 50 or less people. So, I mean, so even that was different, but not really any other denominations as well. Actually, no, now that you mention it, non-denominational denomination, which, is a kind of an oxymoron. There's actually a really good local church that I really enjoyed going to on Wednesday nights. I had a really great band because some worship teams are they tried, but they're not really talented. This band was tight. Like their music, their instrumentability, I mean, they're well known, and that's why everyone would go to that church. So I mean, they had a really good program. I think I benefited that, just mostly just being around people my age, and it's kind of hanging out too, plus church. They made it fun. All those places that involve like games and stuff beforehand. To add other stuff. It's not just music and a sermon, which I think more churches should probably look into, like adding more fun. Like you should be able to go to church and have fun, I think. Which sounds crazy.
Well, yeah, to some for sure. The old adage is if kids don't have fun at church, they're gonna go have fun somewhere else. And it's true. I mean, like it happens. I remember that being an issue because I went to a very stuffy church that was not fun. I mean, there was nothing fun about it. But in high school, I visited a couple of non-denom churches that were a bit sexier, a bit more like
lack of better term.
Yeah, a bit more fun, better bands, better music, more fun activities, more things for people, more catered to the age of whoever the program was for, that kind of thing. Right. So looking back now, let's take like 15-year-old Jacob. Like, what's the difference? What's the biggest like faith difference between 15-year-old Jacob and your beliefs now?
Oh, yeah, this is definitely what comes to mind is my interactions with friends and family. Because I remember in high school, for instance, there was an instance with one of my good friends. I found out that he was drinking alcohol with friends, and I confronted him on Facebook. And actually, the message still survives in our thread, and it's so cringe looking at it, just saying, I'm so disappointed in you. I can't believe you did that, which is, just look at it now, just laughable. It's like kids, are going to experiment with alcohol and stuff. I mean, it was total hearsay to begin with. I didn't even like ask him, did you do this? It was just like straight off the gun, which is part of me being that age too, being around, especially fundamentalist ideas. Like it's not a question. It's like, you don't really see other sides of it. It's like, this is the way I feel about it. And you're just going to, yell about it until you can't yell anymore. But yeah, definitely now with my interactions with people, I'm just probably the least judgmental Christian you would run into. Like it would take someone like really off the wall to shock me, just because I just don't. People should live their own lives. I know you asked from a religious standpoint, but just for like a political standpoint, being somewhat libertarian-ish, not completely hardline. That's kind of put it in that realm to describe it. Just let people do what they want to do, even if I mean in some cases obviously I'm not going to agree with what everyone does all the time, but I'm just like, I see why they do that. Like just understanding where they're coming from.
It almost sounds like empathy, right? Like just
I'm 100% an empath, I guess.
Yeah. You're an empath. Hashtag empath.
Hashtag empath.
Well, I mean that definitely like is probably the most fundamental difference between what I would say is someone who like puts their religion before others, like, and like they're not allowed to be empathetic. They're not allowed to hear where someone's coming from, right? because they're right. They're right. So why would they bother listening to where anyone else is coming from when they know that they are right? So it sounds like when you were 15, you were so sure that a 15-year-old drinking alcohol, which I mean, you and I would probably be like, yeah, 15-year-olds don't drink alcohol.
I'm obviously not advocating for underage drinking.
Right. But we're also not going to hate a 15-year-old for
right. It's understandable
doing
that you're going to sneak something from a liquor cabinet. It's like
totally.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of that. It's a lot of like especially ultra conservatism as well. So I mean, it's very obviously far right wing viewpoints growing up, which I don't like extremes of anything.
Right.
So it's just as an adult, but it definitely, because you got a picture. I was in high school around 2005 through 2009, so we're talking post 9/11. So Bush, Obama era. So it's a lot of Middle Eastern talk, a lot of xenophobia and such. So I remember just people. I just had this because I was a kid when 9/11 happened, and so I'm sitting there like thinking that everyone in the Middle East is a terrorist, which is not true. So it just kind of just brewed this, like ignorance, speaking about it earlier, that it gives you should have an opportunity to explain to kids in a better way of this happened, but it's not the whole picture of people in that region of the world. So I know that probably got a little off topic, but
not necessarily. I mean, I think it is the topic, right? Like, it's like this is where the rubber meets the road of the harm of Christianity, and like especially with kids. I mean, I don't know an elementary, middle school, high school kid who has any nuanced thoughts about the Middle East. Like I don't think they can. Right. The problem in Christianity is there doesn't seem to be much like whether it be Christian parents or Christian pastors or what have you, steering kids in a direction of like, don't parrot, Rush Limbaugh or, whoever was big at the time. Like, don't parrot those like ultra conservative radical views. There's encouragement of it almost in kids, and that's pretty problematic. Now, people across a political spectrum might indoctrinate their kids with whatever, but like in general, what's frightening about Christianity is it doesn't have the anti-war stance you would think it would have, like based on the religious teachings. Right. It does, and it has, in that era, was at post 9/11, there was a lot of Americans who were bred with like a hatred for the Middle East. Me too. I was actually just talking to a guide today about how since 9/11, spoiler alert to the audience, we're actually recording this on the eve of 9/11.
Oh, that is true. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, this will come out much later, but we were talking about that specifically today, funny enough, and Jesus was Middle Eastern, right? Like this religion was Middle Eastern for virtually all of the Old Testament, but like even the New Testament, like
right, yeah. Because I was reading parts of the Bible when they were talking about Nazareth, which I believe is in present day Iraq. So you're talking about. It's just funny with the imagery too of Jesus, as a a white person, but that's going to be all cultures too. You see imagery of in Africa of Black Jesus and such, just to show your culture with a religious figure. So I get it, but still not accurate, obviously.
Right. And unfortunately here I think a lot of people do think it is accurate. But I think that's relevant to say because obviously this happened while you were attending a private Christian school where I don't know what the teachers were necessarily doing, but I'm sure other students were like feeding off of like the rhetoric of whatever their parents and their churches were saying. So let's back up a little bit. Like, let's start with just elementary school. Like, how would you describe in general your elementary school experience?
It's a lot of, learning like the Bible songs and such, like I know there was a reference, when y'all were talking about the Lord's Army in one of the other episodes, and I just got nostalgic in kind of a weird way when I realized how interesting perspective when you look from the outside, like, oh, okay, that's very militaristic. But when you're a kid, you're singing all these songs, or another good one, just thinking about Jesus loves the little children of the world, red and yellow, black and white. So they're like, well, you probably shouldn't be calling people red and yellow anymore. Because I was thinking about that the other day. I'm sitting there, I'm like, it just didn't age well in my mind, just from that standpoint.
No, yeah. I sang that one too. Deep and Wide. That was a deep and wide, deep and wide. Basically any song that had like motions, I feel like. So you were doing that at school.
Well, that's more specifically at church. I'm sure we did it like very young at school, but that wasn't part of anything in my education. It was more of just church related. But we were more asking about elementary school, like or elementary, like a school standpoint?
Yeah, so like what was your daily life like in like elementary school? I'm sure it changed. Obviously, like first grade and third grade are probably pretty different, but
Right.
you know, what was it, you know, did it feel very regulated? I'm aware of which school you went to. Did they have uniforms?
Yeah, so we did, wear uniforms, which felt normal at the time. And even looking back at it now, I actually, could back it at a certain degree. Because, I mean, you just picked a color to wear and it made it super easy. But, yeah, just in general, my style-wise, just outside of school was just laughable because I was an athlete. I loved playing baseball and basketball. So I mean, just wear athletic stuff. I would try to wear, basketball shoes to church, and my sister would laugh at me like, "What?" I didn't realize what style was. So I mean, you could make an argument that uniforms does suppress expression in a certain sense, but it did make it really easy to wake up and just pick a color and throw it on. So from that standpoint,
and so you get up, you put on this like I don't know, was it like plaid? Was it like classic?
No, it was just like a polo and khakis.
Gotcha.
So nothing too crazy. We had to wear predominantly white tennis shoes, so we all looked like a bunch of old folks with their little tennis shoes. Can I still say that? Is that loud?
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, that's pretty funny. Okay, so you put on your khakis and your white shoes. That's like a 8-year-old or whatever.
Yeah, I mean that's from. Well, I think, actually, no, it might be preschool. You might be able to wear what you want, but definitely kindergarten, you start wearing the uniforms all the way up to high school.
Wow.
So,
and it's similar style the whole time?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, there's some variations of it, but for the most part, I mean, the logos might change of the institution, but it's still pretty much the same thing.
Gotcha. Okay, so what was like your, I mean, obviously you're going to learn the basics, like you're going to learn math and science and whatever. Mm-hmm. Was there like specific Bible classes as early as elementary school?
Oh yeah, we had Bible classes as well. We memorize Bible verses and learn about the Bible. So I mean, there's always one course all the way from preschool all the way up to senior year. Always have a Bible course, which it would vary more so on the high school end, but from the basic standpoint in the elementary school, it would be the typical like, let me tell you the story of Daniel. And here's like the little pictures of the lion's den and stuff, telling stories type of thing. So I mean, it kind of mirrored what I would experience in at church and small groups and stuff like that.
So was there? I mean, besides like I guess the math and science is what would make it the most different, but you wouldn't. Was there like a ton of difference between Sunday school and elementary school at that age, at least?
Well, I mean, at that age, I mean, obviously, with it being an institution like that, it's very academic focused. So, you did have your Bible classes, but for the most part, the only difference I could tell is you might, say have prayer before each class. But it still was, focused on the material. It wasn't like always talking about God for the most part. So
okay, so let's move on to middle school. You get to middle school. By that time, I feel like you're probably through athletics and stuff starting to like develop socially. Just because I mean that's a pretty normal time for people to start, branching out in the kinds of friends they're willing to have and like that kind of thing, and that they have a little more of their own identity and aren't just doing whatever mom and dad say. So how was middle school for you at that school?
Just looking back at it now, I've had very low social awareness in both middle school and high school for the most part. I was able to make friends, but I would say it's probably a lot harder for me to have like best friends and stuff. I was always like person in a group of friends. It was definitely interesting, it's just for a guy going through puberty at that time, just everything, a whirlpool of emotions. So it's just, I feel like it would be like a typical, I mean, I can't compare it because I've never been to a, public middle school, but yeah, it's just the typical, middle school experience, I would think.
Did you go to any like Bible camps or anything?
Yeah, I went to a few of them, which I mean, those were always fun because you got to go zip lining and hang out, but yeah, those were always good experiences. I mean, obviously it would be like very focused on the worship services and stuff that would be longer than normal. So yeah, I enjoyed going to those, I would say.
Gotcha. And then when you get to high school, I mean, usually that's when hard questions start happening, just internally. So up till middle school, I assume like church slash God slash, with your background, Southern Baptism,
Right.
Is like your world. Like I would assume there's not, are you interacting with non-Christians at all?
The only time I was, if I was playing like baseball, like with other kids and stuff, I would run in contact with them. But it was just so hard to be friends with them because they all knew each other because they went to the same high school. So I would be the guy that no one knows. It's like the outsider. So it was always, between, so it's like private school kids and there was one team I was on that had Mormons. So it was just like, an outside group of people. Like I felt, still included and stuff, but I couldn't interact because they would be talking about something I knew nothing about because they would be talking about their experience at school.
So did it feel like, did you have like an awareness? Because I know in homeschool, but you don't have to be homeschooled very long before people will start throwing the word sheltered around, People just assume you're sheltered because you're homeschooled.
Right.
And so even from like age, 8 or 9, you're like, oh, I must be sheltered just because you hear it so much. Even from other Christians, right? Like even from people who send their kids to private Christian school, they might go like, oh, a homeschooled kid, like you're probably pretty sheltered then. Right. But did you feel sheltered or like you had an awareness of your shelteredness?
I mean, at the time, no. I mean, towards middle school, like we were obviously aware that the same jokes they were saying in public school was probably not the jokes that we were saying, because you got to see it. Because I was in middle school around 2003 through 2005, 4ish. So I mean, it really wasn't. We didn't have smartphones or anything, so you couldn't really fact check anything. So I mean, it's all speculation on like dirty jokes and stuff. Because everyone would hear jokes from their friends outside of school and bring them in, like, hey, check this out, and you get huge laughs because you're like, oh, that's the wildest thing I've ever heard, because you're not going to hear it, at a sheltered environment like that.
Yeah, that's always so fascinating to me because private Christian school, I have several friends who, grew up in private Christian schools, and like in some sense they're like they certainly perceive themselves as wilder than they are.
Right.
But they're also not as they're not as sheltered as a lot of homeschoolers, right? So like they do have those interactions outside of school that they're bringing in.
It's like a different level up, but not by much.
Well, and but they're socializing so much more, right? Like they're you probably, it's a large school. So how large were classes in middle school?
Probably around 30 at most. It's very small classrooms for sure.
Yeah, but it was I've been on the campus. I know it's like a huge thing.
Right. Well, you got a lot of, it's all the whole grade, so that's
right.
why. Yeah.
Yeah. But that's okay. So moving to high school, when more like questions are probably going to pop into your mind. You've already mentioned that like you were calling out like a guy who was rumored to have had alcohol or whatever.
Right. Exactly.
But I don't know. Did you? I certainly did in high school. I might not have been as honest about them back then, but I certainly had questions about Christianity and some of the stuff I was being taught. Did you feel like you had any like questions like, wait, this doesn't quite make sense?
Well, yeah, of course. And in that environment, I feel like the teachers would listen, but you wouldn't want to bring anything up that's going to be like that, because then the spotlight's on you, basically. So, I mean, you're just like, you're doing like a risk assessment. Like, is it worth bringing this up to, especially someone like me that was in the worship team. So they're like, I got to, have this persona about myself, of being the right of everything, doing everything right. So I felt like there was a lot of pressure there too, as well.
So like in a Bible class, because I assume you had Bible classes basically every year of your, So when it came to like theological questions, I'm sure some teachers would probably address it somewhat, but did you ever feel like they answered the question well, or it was just kind of obligatory? Like let's say, I don't know, like they're talking about the problem of evil. Like, did you talk about the problem of evil in high school, or did they kind of just not talk about like, why does God let good things happen to bad people? Like, was that ever talked about in any of those classes? Yeah,
it was. I mean, there would be questions of I know specifically someone would ask a question about, what about kids and tribes in Africa that have never heard about Jesus? How are they supposed to be held accountable? And I mean, and I would have honest teachers that would say, I can't answer that question. That's a hard question to answer. And to be quite honest, like, you just got to pray for them. Was basically all you could say. I had our pastor, his popular response to it was like, you shouldn't be worrying about them. You should be worrying about you knowing about the truth and what to do with it.
Yikes.
Yeah.
That's the worst take, I would say, to that.
It's just avoiding the question.
Yeah, and avoiding the question and shaming someone at the same time. Nice job. Wow, okay, so when you were at that school, did you feel like Christians, because you, I mean, obviously understood not everyone was Christian, like you knew that,
right.
But like, did you feel like Christians were the minority of the country, the majority of the country? Like, how did you perceive how popular Christianity was, I guess?
Oh, it definitely was portrayed in the light of the majority of the country. And it was just basically Hollywood, and everyone on TV was always the atheists and stuff that you would see. But you would know that you couldn't deny that people out there exist, but it was always the consensus that most people were Christians and held your same viewpoint that you did. So you felt like, okay, everyone else has the same viewpoint as me, which is obviously not the case. Especially every single year, it keeps changing in the opposite direction anyway. So,
well, it's also fascinating because that's such a, I mean, you could only do that in a place like the Bible Belt, like where you and I are, like in the South. Like,
well, I mean, if you want to look at it from just a viewpoint of just the Southeast, I mean,
yeah,
if you take the big cities out of the picture, then yeah, it's probably mostly Christian,
right?
So I mean,
right.
that made sense to my brain. So just look, but if you look at the whole picture, you know, that's not necessarily true. It still is a big portion of the country, though, for sure.
But that's interesting that like the main, it was mostly like Hollywood, you said, that was like,
yeah, you always give examples of Hollywoods, and Democrats were always the atheists and agnostic.
Yeah.
So
stay away from the liberals and the godless. Yeah.
Right.
Interesting. Okay. So you did go to college at a place that's technically a Christian school, but they're kind of like, I mean, like Duke is technically a Christian school. Like, what did you didn't have to go to chapel or anything in college, did you?
We had convocation, but unlike high school and middle school, you didn't have to go every week. You just had your card scanned. You had to do it a certain amount of times before you graduated. So, but I enjoyed those because you also had choices on what you wanted to see. They would always present, hey, this is a speaker, this is what they're speaking about. So you would have people obviously doing sermon stuff, but you would also have like psych professors talking about certain aspects of psychology if you wanted to see a lecture on that. So it's very diverse. It's a very different experience, which is with it, you know, still had the title, it still had the presence, and you know, we'd have teachers that would pray and stuff, but it was very, for lack of a better term, more liberal than, because obviously, you know, colleges are going to be more inherently liberal anyway. So
yeah, hopefully, yeah. So it's just out of like, that's the liberal arts. I mean, that's right. What you're there to do.
Exactly. Yeah.
So okay, so did you feel any like kind of culture shock when you went to like college, being like, you know, this was obviously, you're not gonna wear uniforms, you're not gonna like have as much order, you're not gonna have as many like-minded people. There is gonna be, I mean, I assume it was still predominantly white, but probably less, probably more diverse than what you were used to.
Still more diverse, but still, you know, it was still kind of skewed a little bit still, because it is private and it was probably very expensive. So.
Yeah, exactly. So was there any kind of like internal like, wow, this is a new world, like, to me? Like, did you feel like your eyes were opened at all, like, versus what you perceive the world to be, like, even as late as high school?
Oh yeah, because I mean, I thought that would be a smooth transition, which for the most part it was. It would be even more of a shock if I went to a bigger school, but I still was like, wow, like people were openly smoking, and so like we would get in trouble if they even heard we smoked out of school. Even if you were 18 years old, I guess it's 19 now, I'm not sure. But I mean, still speaking in that vein, I still remember being shocked that girls were speaking like guys and vulgar. And I was sitting there like, these are not the same type of women I was around, which is nothing wrong with that. They can speak as vulgar as they want. But it was a shock to me, like, wow, I can't believe a girl's talking like that. It was definitely like a front that the girls felt like they had to put on in middle school and high school to be, you know, the pure little angels that they're supposed to be. So.
Yeah, that's probably, that makes sense, because, you probably heard a lot of the same things I did, like, growing up, that, like, you know, women are basically, even if they wouldn't say it as plain as this, it was kind of clear, women are there for men to marry. Like, that's basically their lot in life, is to get married and have children. And, like, even if it wasn't explicit, and even if, you know, there was enough of, like, they can have careers, they can, you know, do things whatever, but like there certainly seemed to be in my environment, specifically at church, where women were not, I guess, seen as equal to men. And so, yeah, I would assume in any kind of environment, like that, growing up, that all the way to 18, and then seeing a girl like just cuss and like tell a dirty joke or something like that. Right. It's like, what? Like, this is even possible?
Yes.
That's crazy. Yeah. Okay, so you're, the reason I asked that is just, I'm like, obviously when you're in something, it's a lot harder to see the problems when you're in it, right? Like, I mean, when I was married, I didn't see all the problems. All the bad behaviors I had as a husband, because I just was in it. Like, I couldn't remove myself. So having, obviously a long time from your private Christian high school days, what do you think was like some of the bigger problems in that environment?
Oh yeah, I do need to bring this up. So, and we had one of our Bible courses, which is the most controversial course that we would have people still talk about this day, was our apologetics course. So we would have, just going back to high school, we would have a whole semester dedicated to learning what's wrong with other religions. So basically, ironically, we had one kid in our school that was Mormon, so he was exempt from his class and didn't have to take his class.
I'm actually kind of shocked a Mormon was allowed to go to that school.
I honestly was too, but everyone treated him normally like that. But we got to think about it too. With all the faults you could take on it, you got to look at it from this perspective too. You have people from different denominations of Christianity, so you can't be too extreme in any aspect of it, because you still have Catholics and all sorts of other denominations.
Catholics were there too.
Yeah, we had Catholics. Yeah.
Fascinating.
So yeah, because it wasn't all Southern. It was mostly non-denominational if you were going to group it, but you still had Baptists and all sorts of other.
Well, and mostly, no, not to throw shade, but mostly like wealthier people. It was an expensive school, so so certainly skewed a kind of that kind of culture way. But that's interesting that it wasn't like a specific denomination dominating the culture. It sounds like
it's pretty spread out, which I think added some balance to it.
Probably some needed balance. So was that true with teachers as well? Were they allowed to be different kinds of Christians, or was that more narrow?
Well, yeah, they were obviously allowed to be any denomination, but they still had to stick to certain truths.
They had like a doctrine statement or whatever.
Gotcha. Certain Christian principles. I mean, you obviously
Jesus is God. Blah blah blah.
Right. You couldn't. They wouldn't let a teacher work there if they weren't a Christian.
Gotcha.
So
okay. So you're in this apologetics class, which, to give perspective, I took my first apologetics class when I was a junior at Bible college studying to be a pastor. So to have an apologetics class in high school is already a little bit radical, but so they're telling you how to argue with people who believe different, right?
Right, basically showing the flaws in other religions. Like, I remember we would actually watch episodes of South Park because it actually showed, not making fun, like showing the flaws, but in a, obviously in a satirical, comedic way of Mormonism and also Scientology were two religions that we studied. So we're showing like, hey, this is actually, Trey Parker and Matt Stone of South Park, they're actually showing what they believe. And it's ridiculous. I mean, you show like Lord Xenu with the Scientologist and coming in with the 3D volcano and all that craziness. You're like, wow, that's bonkers. But then when you think about it, it's like, well, if people can make the same, conclusions out of Christianity, it's just like, oh, well, the Bible told me so. It's like, well, you can believe it's still not a logical argument, because the whole idea of Christianity is living by faith. So it's not completely illogical.
Right. Yeah, it's not. It's by its nature supposed to be trans-rational, is what we call it. So it's not irrational, but it's supposed to go beyond logic, right?
Right, exactly.
So yeah, you're not. It is weird to point out the logical fallacies of other religions, and then kind of implicitly say like, "And we're right," and it's like, well, but don't we believe some crazy shit too? like there's a little bit of like, isn't there? This is okay. So what do you think made it so controversial?
Well, I mean, you had some parents that were not okay with that. The more open-minded parents, because I mean, like you said, we had a diverse amount of people. Some people like, you should be focusing on scripture, which I mean, for other Bible classes in high school, we actually did study scripture. It wasn't all apologetics, but their whole viewpoint, which is a valid point, is like, you're supposed to be a Bible class, teach the Bible. Like, why are we spending time on this? like learning like the fallacies of Hinduism and Islam and everything else.
Well, it is odd. I mean, apologetics is I forget all my Latin, but it basically means defense of. Like, that's the idea. Apologetics is a defense of Christianity. Right. So what's weird about that is, well, there's a lot of things weird about it, but one of the biggest things is you're automatically putting the burden of proof on someone else, right, which is really strange. Like, to be like, prove me wrong. And it's like, well, that's not usually how you debate. Like, you don't usually say, assume I'm right, now prove me wrong. That's kind of a bad way, a bad faith way of arguing. But what's even more fascinating to me is it doesn't sound like they were talking about how to defend your faith as much as they were talking about the problems of other religions, which is, right, that's actually really interesting, because that's not really what apologetics is technically. I mean, you do learn those arguments, but you don't usually frame it in such a way that, like, like, on offense, like, let me go attack other religions. That's not usually what apologetics is. So that's interesting that that's at least what you recall as the predominant messaging.
Right. I mean, there's points there where you're talking about the ways to defend Christianity as well, but the bulk of it is definitely, and to add, disclaimer to it, he obviously said there's, a message and a manner and the way to present it, to not be disrespectful, to be fair on it, but it still could be used to be combative, I would say.
Well, it's almost disrespectful by doing it, right? Like, it's like, yeah, there's a way for, if you and I have a disagreement, there's a way for us to talk about it in a respectful way, for sure. But it'd be weird if I, like, went to someone and was like, hey, here's all the ways Jacob is wrong. Mm-hmm. Next time you're talking to a Jacob, make sure you use these arguments. Like, that's a weird, that's not a very respectful attitude, I wouldn't think, towards other things. But it's not really about respect, right? Because it's a different definition of respect in Christian circles. Interesting. Okay, so yeah, you're probably. I mean, you didn't study religion in college. You studied business, correct?
Yeah, I was business. Didn't take any. Well, I think I had to take one just to meet the requirement. But that professor was actually really cool. It's like kind of laid back kind of guy.
Yeah. Kind of like we're all just here to check some boxes. Kind of.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah.
But I mean, he was a very, very well respected religion professor at the institution. He actually passed away a couple years ago. But yeah, he was a very, very well respected guy. Very good guy, for sure.
Gotcha. Okay, so when you're 18, 19, 20, like young adult, finally, kind of on your own more now, meeting way different kinds of people, did you sense a shift in your faith during that time?
Yes, and there was one point in my freshman year, I had a professor that gave us the reading of the Allegory of the Cave, which is by Plato and kind of narrated by Socrates. You would give you a little rundown of that, or
I love the Cave, so yeah, give it to me.
Yeah, I actually reread it this morning to refresh my mind, but it definitely changed the way I think about things. But the basic premise is that imagine there's prisoners in a cave. They have their legs and their head in shackles where they can't move their neck or legs. They're looking at a rock formation, and behind them, without them knowing, is a pit of fire, which has a partition, kind of like what puppets use. And imagine people are carrying objects over that curtain like a puppet. So the people that are in shackles are seeing the shadows of the objects that you're going. So that's all they know is the shadow objects on this cave. So then imagine if you let one of the prisoners free and they look back and they see the fire, they would be so just shocked by the fact that, and blinded by that fire, they couldn't even, understand what's going on or believe that that's reality. And then Plato takes it a step further. Imagine that if you drag that prisoner out and force him to get outside the cave, there's a big opening to the outside world, and look out in the sun, who'd be blinded by it. But I think the whole premise of that is eventually you get adjusted to the sun to like, oh, this is actually real reality. And then once you go back into the cave and try to get people out, like, no, you're crazy. Like, I can't believe you're coming here telling us all this stuff. Like, we are happy in this cave. This is our reality. This is truth. What you're saying is nonsense. And I had a big light bulb, and that's very basic, and description of this. I'm not, an expert on this, but I had a light bulb moment, like, oh my God, like just the whole idea of just learning, like it just, it gave me a different perspective on things, like, because I'm like, I could easily see myself as being that prisoner looking at the shadow figures on that cave wall my whole life. And that was probably a turning point the way I believe things now, I would say.
Yeah, first off, good job. I like that. I think that might be the quickest summary of the cave that was accurate that I've heard in a long time. So
I hope I gave it justice.
I think you did. Yeah, very interesting, because obviously, you know, Plato precedes Jesus. So this is written before all of the Bible and stuff. So it's
Right.
and Paul probably had read some of Plato, which is also kind of interesting.
Right.
So just to clarify, is that like, was your light bulb about learning being like the religion was the cave, or just the specific Southern Baptismness of it all? Or was it more on the other way, where it's like, oh, maybe there is something to this faith, but people are so stuck in like the shadows of what this faith could be? Like, what, just talk more about what that aha moment was.
Right. I mean, it spoke to like everything. Just it spoke from a religious standpoint. Obviously, I still, you know, kept the Christianity, but I was so more skeptical on everything and challenged everything I saw, because everything I was fed in high school, I probably blindly believed and not challenged it for the most part. And then once I heard that, I'm like, oh, you're supposed to challenge things and question everything. So then that point, and then from a political standpoint, you know, being far right wing and everything, and not bulging and everything, and wanting to combat people about evolution and how that's wrong and stuff. It's just you just try to understand where people come from. I actually had a professor at my college. He taught me biology, and he said, there's like, the way I look at it is evolution and Christianity have to be compatible, and that's what I believe. And that's the first time I ever heard that standpoint, because I was always taught evolution is crap. If you believe any part of it, it is wrong. You can't trust any of it. And then this professor's like, well, professional standpoint, I see this has to happen with, like, you know, not the creation standpoint, but like the, you know, the adaptations and stuff like that that you see between animals. So I'm sitting there, I'm like, that's the first time I heard that. I'm like, that's so crazy that you could actually have that viewpoint. I didn't think that was even possible.
Yeah. So do you think they were teaching you anti-evolution? I'm going to call it propaganda, because I don't know what else to call it, really. But anti-evolution viewpoints, and I'm not just talking about creation narratives. I mean, you know, fine, but I'm talking about like strictly like evolution is scary, this is wrong, this is stupid, whatever it may be. Mm-hmm. Were they teaching you that as early as elementary school, or did that come a little bit later?
It's probably towards like middle school, once you could actually develop those minds. There's always like, the Earth is 6,000 years old, 10,000 at the most. Because you have to, you know, follow the strict
You have to have that
timeline.
4,000 year margin of error because of the genealogies.
Right. And then of course, when you do the study, the word day in Genesis can mean a period of time. So it's not an actual physical 24-hour day. So, I mean, which that, you know, could also justify, you know, believing in both, like my professor did. It's like, well, you know, it wasn't 24 hours each day God created things. So.
Yeah, I mean, there's a million different views. You know, Christians, I would actually say, based on what I've read, it seems most Christians from most denominations do believe in like most of the 4 billion years old evolution narratives. As nowadays, I don't know how it was, you know, when we were growing up, but it seems like, I mean, most Catholics are not 6-day creationists. You know, most denominations aren't now. Southern Baptists definitely are. And like the tradition I grew up in, Presbyterians definitely are 6-day creationists. So I'm sure I was subjected to a lot, but I remember it was very early where it was like, you'll hear about this thing, evolution, and they think we're monkeys, you know, just like all the like silly.
Come from no monkey.
Yeah. Yeah. Just very just fear evolution was kind of the messaging. Like, this is a terrible thing. It almost felt like the battle, right? Like, if atheists have their way and teach evolution, we lose, you know? Right. Yeah. So that's very interesting. So yeah, you probably grew up, I would assume, even towards high school, especially as you're a little more combative, I assume, in high school, based on what you've said.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I would get, especially when we were in the apologetics class, which actually covered evolution as well, and the apologetics. Like, I would get in groups and like argue with people that were atheists about, you know, we learned a lot about the fallacies of evolution, like why certain things like Archaeopteryx and and were not accurate representations of evolution in fossils. So I mean, I forgot that was even part of it. But yeah, that was part of our apologetics class. Was evolution was a big chunk of it as well.
Interesting. Yeah. And I think it's pretty common. And like, obviously I had a guy on my show to talk about intelligent design. And I think there is a way to talk about some of this stuff that's fine. But there was a lot of indoctrination with kids. Like, it's 6 days. And if you don't believe that, you're not a Christian. Like, it was pretty big deal. Wow. Okay. So you, as an adult, you're kind of realizing, okay, so questioning things and interacting with ways that are different than how I grew up. Are you starting to perceive your childhood education, at least, as like very monolithic, as very like there was kind of one way to live? And are you kind of realizing, like, what's your relationship with that? Are you angry about it? Are you like, oh, I just need to change now? Like, what was your feeling towards your education specifically, but maybe just your Christian upbringing in general as you're a young adult?
I mean, I still saw it as positive. I mean, there's probably other students there that would disagree with me on that, and rightfully so. But, I mean, obviously, just coming to that moment with Plato, just going back to that, is just being able to not, because you're taught to think one way. I feel like it just robbed you of questioning things and brain development about how to learn to challenge things, and also, get your own viewpoints. I just think that's very important growing up, just not regurgitating what other people are telling you. Which, I mean, when you're a kid, I mean, it's hard to think at that same level as an adult. So, I mean, you're not fully formed in the brain and everything. So, I mean, that's always an area of it as well. But, yeah, I don't feel cheated on it, because, I mean, it still was, when you go to private school, they're going to give you a great education from just the secular side of things like math and science and stuff. Is still a top-notch education. So, I mean, the way I look at it is, even if I was still like robbed of that, at least I learned that later and still got a great education,
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. So, I mean, private Christian schools are obviously, no two of them are going to be the same. Right. Partially because they are private, right? Like, their regulations are going to be different. Most of them usually have like an accreditation system where they're still being accredited by someone, and there's still like laws they have to follow. Like, it's never going to be too off the rails, right, hopefully. But there are, like, there was the church I went to had a private school in it that, I've since learned as an adult had a lot of scandals, and like also was not a great education. Pretty hiring underqualified teachers pretty frequently and that kind of thing. Yeah. But I do know enough about the school you went to know that would not be the case there, that it would be like, there was enough resources to make a, probably pretty robust education, a pretty robust curriculum, or else obviously, schools that have those resources are going to be, they have to be good on some level. They have to be able to get you into good colleges, or else they're going to lose money, because their money, that's what they're selling, is like, you go here, you will, exactly, do well. So I did want to ask, so you think, I'm hearing that you think your education did help your college experience, not hinder it.
From an academic standpoint, absolutely. Because, I mean, just from that biology class I took was way easier than my high school biology class. And then my statistics class in high school, I took AP stats in high school. I had 2 business stats classes. That was a breeze compared to that. So, I mean, it was very rigorous, because, I mean, you got a picture. I mean, the school I went to was still a great institution, but there's a lot of kids that went to, Ivy League schools, and they're lawyers and doctors now. So, I mean, they had to make sure that those kids were, because everyone had the same classes. There was like maybe a remedial class at some semester, like, but I'm not quite sure on that. But I mean, yeah, everyone going to that school is pretty much very academic focused.
Yeah, I would assume so. So at least you got that. I know that's not everyone's story who went to a private Christian school, right, but I would assume most people. Well, I'll ask this. I didn't think to ask this until just now, but were there people who like got kicked out of the school for academic reasons ever? Like, who just couldn't cut it academically?
Not that I can think of.
Okay, so which is a good sign. That means they're not like, right. Yeah, they're paying attention.
There were some kids that were struggling, but they would get their grades up from the most part. From what I remember, I don't think anyone was held back, because, I mean, they would make sure that at least you're going to pass.
What about for non-academic reasons? Were people kicked out for, I don't know, any number of Christian things?
Yeah, I mean, and I know in middle school there was 3 students that were kicked out for drug use. It's very secret.
Middle school.
Yeah, it was middle school.
Wow.
But the thing about it is, there was 3 students that came from, I believe if my memory serves correct, they were public school kids that were kicked out, and then their parents brought them to private school to get them right. And then those 3 were still corrupting each other, for a better lack of term. So, I mean, yeah, they kind of looked, at the time I didn't, know what drug use looked like, but looking back now, yeah, they were the zombie look on their face and stuff. So yeah, they got kicked out.
That's sad. I mean, not necessarily a bad move, but just sad.
Yeah, just at that level. I mean, because you didn't have very many kids using drugs or alcohol in middle school at all. I mean,
well, public schools. I know this from my mom working in the public school system and having 2 sisters work in the public school system. Like, even though, like, I don't know, public schools are just more, because they're more used to it, I guess, that kind of event. They have more mechanisms to deal with it.
Right.
So, I mean, I would assume the school you went to is very like, we're not gonna put resources into this if it's not a problem we're encountering that much.
No, I mean, and I would probably make the same decision they would make too, just to expel them. Like, look, it's not worth our resources to do it, because I mean, being a private school, I mean, they make sure everyone that's on that campus, and while you're there, there's no way they're sneaking in drugs. At least at the time, I don't know now. I mean, it could be different, but I mean, public schools, they probably still had to this day have more access to stuff like that than us in our situation. So,
what was when I went to Bible college, there were a lot of things I had to like sign to say, like, from a behavior standpoint, like I wouldn't do this, I wouldn't do that. Did you have to do anything like that? Like sign behavior? I mean, you probably didn't have to sign. Your parents probably did, but like, did you have to adhere to like stricter behavior than maybe you would at whether it's like a public school is not going to it's going to encourage kids to not have sex, right? But it's not going to expel kids if they do. Was there anything like that kind of was stricter about that?
So I didn't have to sign anything. I think I was probably grandfathered in because I was in preschool. But I think the kids that transferred in from other institutions that went to middle school and high school probably had to sign something, if I were to guess. But yeah, to go back to that, I mean, we did have one guy that was, because I did drama, that he ended up off school property having sex with somebody. The school found out and he was kicked out of the play. He wasn't expelled. They just said, you're not allowed to do the play anymore.
Fascinating. So that's interesting, because it probably would almost be, I wouldn't be surprised if it would be illegal for them to kick him out completely.
No, because I think they were both of age, so from a legal standpoint you couldn't do anything, but you could still reprimand them by taking things away from them. Right,
because because my college could legally kick me out for that stuff because I agreed to it, because I signed something that said. But that's interesting that they probably couldn't, so they had to punish him somehow, so they went for the play.
And it was like a couple weeks before we premiered, so they had to bring in like a ringer to do his part, because he was a big part in that play that particular year. So
wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. So if you could, I'm sure there were multiple, but like, what was the most, maybe the issue you noticed at the time and not later in life, but what was the most obvious issue at the private Christian school you went to?
I mean, it's just really tough to see like some solutions, because I mean, the stuff I brought up, with being able to challenge stuff, just being able to be open with challenging certain doctrinal ideas. But I mean, still at the end of the day, I mean, just putting myself in their shoes, playing devil's advocate, you're still a Christian institution. Like, there's still like certain expectations, even probably from the parents, of what you're supposed to be promoting anyway. So I feel like from their standpoint, they're probably handcuffed and limited by the board of directors and the school board for that, and for those schools too. So I mean, it's kind of pigeonholed to really not be able to really change anything too dramatically, I would think. But I still feel like just being able to let your students, like, hey, how do you feel about this? Instead of saying, hey, write a paper on why this is correct and why everything I'm saying is correct.
So not necessarily the most open-minded environment.
Well,
no. Okay. And yeah, looking back, do you feel like there's like something you didn't notice like growing up that like now looking it's like, oh my gosh, this is so obvious? Like, a problem, because you're talking about the kind of bureaucracy, which I think is a big problem in a lot of Christian institutions that aren't I mean, it's a problem in churches too, but I think the bureaucracy, rather than like a dictator, churches a lot of times is a dictatorship. Like, it's just one guy running the show. But yeah, there's like these layers in like church, in Christian organizations that aren't churches, where there's just, a board of directors. There's usually money involved, with like people not wanting to lose money. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so looking back, do you feel like that was kind of the bureaucracy of it all was maybe like the fundamental flaw?
I mean, it probably is, but I mean, that's going to be a problem in any organization, whether it's secular or not. But yeah, that's definitely an opportunity for them, just to be able to let their students feel comfortable enough to question what they're doing, instead of saying, "Hey, this is what you have to believe," kind of thing. But I mean, I still had some teachers that were great. I mean, one of my musical, I guess he worked in the fine arts. He actually saw him when I went back to see another production. He said, "There's like, I got to pretend like, I'm anti-gay now, but I really don't care." He's like, "I'm really glad I don't have to put up with that anymore." He's sitting there, because I mean, if you're in the fine arts, I mean, come,
right.
Not to stereotype any organization, but
if it's not gay, it's not good.
Right.
No, it's true. It's true. Yeah, interesting. Well, okay, so I have to ask this, to stay on brand. Would you describe any of your private school's culture as cult-like?
I wouldn't say any more than just churches in general. It didn't feel cultish. Like, I know I've listened to all your podcasts. I've heard some horror stories of cultish activities in churches and organizations that are terrible, and I just feel blessed that I really didn't have to experience that personally. I'm sure there's some other students. I mean, obviously, being we did have some gay people at our school, so I mean, it was more of like the George Bush policy, like don't ask, don't tell type of thing. Like it wasn't like a witch hunt on homosexuals, but I mean, it's just, I almost forgot what the question was now. I went.
Where's any of it cult like?
I would say in aspects of just like the Christian verbiage, just like the way Christians talk. Like when I go back to the school and hear people talk to each other, it's a very like weird way, because that's not the way I talk now. It's like, just like the Christian isms and stuff. So they're like the over enthusiasm that you experience at churches and private schools, just like the kind of almost like fake. Just like, "Oh, how are you? Like, that's so great."
It's such
like
a classic like Southern version of Christianity,
yeah,
like where it's just like,
that's where it feels kind of cultish, like the whole, just verbiage and here, let me pray for you, lay hands on you, which it's not inherently bad, but it just it when you're not around that all the time, like I did back in the day, it's very odd now, just looking back at it.
Yeah, it makes sense. Wow. Okay. So yeah. So it's more in the talking, which I find interesting, because I mean, like, I would think, from an outsider's view, because I obviously still have an insider's view, even though I didn't go to private Christian college. I did for my undergrad, but I didn't, growing up, and so I don't have like the first person experience per se, but I do know that from an outsider's perspective, probably the most cult-like thing would be like the uniforms or like the that kind of thing. But I think that's actually a valuable thing you say about it's how people talk, because if you talk to people who are in cults of various kinds, whether it's lesser known ones, small ones, or the bigger ones, like, yeah, there's a cadence, there's a syntax, there's a way of talking where you're like, are you real? Like, are you, like, it feels like they're following a script or something. Right. So I think that's actually really astute to like point that out. Like, yeah, probably the most cult-like thing was how people talked at that school. Probably is not.
It's just not the way people talk in the real world.
Right. It's just, it's a clearly different way of talking. And you would say some of the people who, from there still talk that way?
Yeah, I mean, you still got people that are probably fundamentalist at heart, but you still have a lot of people like me too that sitting there like not too traumatized, just because I mean, I obviously in a privileged situation to be straight white guy. So I mean, I'm the very quintessential private school student. So I mean, there's nothing that I could be attacked at, but there's a lot of other students that's not that case. So
yeah, it definitely us straight white guys get rewarded without realizing it until later.
Exactly. That's why I really don't have that much just on trauma side of things.
Yeah.
So,
Well, so how much every school has like negative pros and cons, right?
Right.
So how much impact do you think Christianity had on the more negative aspects of your school experience? Like, do you feel like it was directly a result from them being a Christian school?
To answer your question in a very weird and specific way, I would say just looking from a biblical standpoint kind of influences the way you perceive things in regular life. Just a quick example, something recently that I've noticed is I always look to see signs, because there's always, in scripture, like everything's a sign. So I would always find that, like dating in particular, like, oh, this is a sign, this is my person I should be with, and you would be with them even though they're not the right person for you, because they fit all the checklist of everything you were looking for. Like, oh, this is a sign, this is my person. So yeah, you would see everything like in a biblical standpoint, like, oh, this is a sign. I feel like God's telling me to do this. And it's like, and then sometimes, like, because I had some teachers there saying, it's kind of hard to interpret what God's telling you, what you're telling yourself too. They were pretty quite frank on that aspect now that I think about it. But yeah, just from that standpoint of, because not everyone has that perspective when they're making decisions of, the biblical standpoint of, is this what God's wanting me to do and such. But I mean, yeah, from my experience, just thinking that way can actually have a negative impact.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily like it is the school teaching that kind of Christian messaging, definitely a specific version of Christianity, but a version of Christianity that teaches to look for signs and like to expect God to be working through you or whatever kind of language can actually impact you in such a way that you're seeing things that aren't there.
Yes, that's a perfect way of putting it. That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, I think that's very accurate. That part of the reason I went to Bible college is I felt called. Mm-hmm. I still can't tell you what that means. Like, nothing happened. Like, there was no specific thing I can point to.
Right.
But what I was taught was, well, it's never going to be so specific. And so so then what? Then you're basically just kind of making stuff up in your head.
Right. I mean, other instances, you wouldn't trust your gut feeling on like investing in something without checking
the
financials behind it.
Right.
It's
exactly.
the same concept.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so do you feel like you were misled a little bit, like with some of the like evolution stuff or like some of the Bible stuff? Like, do you feel like you were misled by the school, either on purpose or on accident?
Well, yeah, just because I watch a lot of like nature documentaries and stuff, so I hear, see the other perspectives on things. But yeah, there's certain aspects of evolution that they would get wrong, like the whole idea that a mammal would jump into a body of water and instantaneously have gills, and that's what they want you to believe, that an animal that's a reptile is going to jump in and become a fish just like that. Like, well, that's not what evolution teaches. And I think that a lot of Christians believe there's the creation aspect of it too, but I mean, we see in nature all the time, just through large periods of times where certain features of animals change based off their environment and food sources and such. I mean, you can't deny that. I mean, there's records of it, just seeing, the finches, and the everything as well, just from what Darwin observed,
Yeah, in our lifetime, like it is a fact, right? Like it's not like it's as much a fact as gravity or stars or sun. It's just like it's a thing that happens.
I feel like a lot of people are just ignoring that.
Right.
So.
And there are people who do that. What's scarier is when it's more on the institutional academic side, because of course there's going to be people who believe things that just aren't true. I mean, people aren't perfect. They're going to, have kind of crazy beliefs here or there. It is just odd when it's like taught as fact, or taught as like not even just taught as a truth, but the ultimate truth, which is what I feel like I experienced a lot growing up Christian, was just like, this is fact. Like, this is the reality, and anyone who gets it wrong, they're wrong. Lucky you, you're right.
Right? Yeah, it's really kind of a narcissistic view when you think about it. Yeah. Just saying like, we have this knowledge that no one else has, So it kind of justifies people in their mind to do the apologetic things, like saying, hey, you're wrong and this is why. And here's, because I mean, I was taught, in high school that you need to bring your Bible with you when you go to college so you can share the word with people. And which that was like that. We kind of, to be fair, most people laughed behind the back, like that's not really. But I really honestly thought that's what the expectation was. But then I got there, I'm like, no, I'm not gonna have any friends if I show up like, hey, I'm Jacob. I got to share, a passage with you.
Yeah, that's a quick way to not make friends.
Yeah, I mean that's not how you.
How to
friends.
Lose friends and lose influence.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Well, so the last thing I'll kind of ask, so a lot of what my argument is in this podcast through conversations with different people is to not think of it too much as like people just getting something wrong, but there actually being some nasty, intentional things being done to people who are none the wiser. Like I think it is true. I don't think every Christian's an idiot or anything like that. I think that's actually a really bad way to look at it. But I do think there's like a cult like brainwashing that happens. And I think that's like an important thing to bring up. And people are obviously free to disagree with me. Do you think that private Christian schools, I mean, you haven't been to every one, I know I'm not expecting you to make a claim about every private Christian school ever, but with your experience, do you feel like there's anything more sinister going on, or do you think it's just normal? You know what I'm saying? Is there any cult aspect behind the existence of private Christian schools?
I mean, there might be something that I'm not aware of, because I mean that's the thing about it too. I mean, for a little sidetrack, I've been part of churches where I thought something was going on and something completely different is going on too. But I don't think there's any like inherently, because I think most people, even if they are pushing the anti-gay, anti-evolution agenda, I think they're genuinely coming from in their mind a loving and caring aspect, even if it might not be the case. So I don't think there's necessarily an inherent evil intention behind what people are doing, but obviously you can obviously get brainwashed in fundamental Christianity to where you're actually doing that without even realizing it, though.
Yeah, and I think that's a pretty normal view. I think I'm the weirdo, but like I do think that is correct. I definitely agree that I talk about this a lot. Like, yeah, Christian bigotry is a very specific kind of bigotry because for the most part, there obviously are people just full of hate and they're just using Christianity to justify their hate. But I do think there are plenty of people who are quote unquote anti-gay because they think that's what love is. Like they've been told that's what love is. And if they understood that it wasn't what love is, they probably would change. They just don't have the ability to understand that based on what they're in and potential brainwashing or whatever. Yeah, I think you're offering a good perspective because there are a lot of Christians who do have good intentions. But yeah, I wonder. I really don't like the idea. It's definitely cultural, right? Like there's private Christian schools. I can't think of really any other religion that has private schools that are at least dominating the US like private Christian schools do. And like that's I mean, yeah, obviously culturally Christianity is the most popular religion in the US, but like that's still kind of disturbing a little bit to me. Like that it needs like a why do you need your own school? Like and the only thing I can think of is because you want to teach something different than the rest of the world. Right. Like
because you couldn't teach the apologetics and classes I brought up
right.
at a public school rather.
Right, exactly. And that's definitely like pointing to something. It might not be pointing to like a cult leader or a band of, evil white guys behind a curtain. It might be. But like I don't think it is. I think there are some self-sustaining accidental damage, that right. like Christians do. But it's the pattern of it all that seems kind of disturbing to me. That makes me always think, I think this is for the sake of leaders benefiting and followers being abused. But those are my thoughts, and I've said them enough on this podcast. Is there anything you feel like we didn't talk about your overall experience, specifically, under 18 private Christian school experience?
Just even preparing for this podcast is kind of hard to, because that's just what you've known your whole life. It's kind of hard to unravel it and look at it, because some of those memories are probably long gone too. So.
Gotcha. Well, anything you want to plug? Any any charities? Any I don't know, books? Anything come to mind that you're like, hey, if you hated everything I said, you should look at this instead?
Well, I have a friend of mine. He's involved with this charity called Speed for Need, which takes disabled people. And they give them these specific little wheelchairs where you can do 5K races with, and it raises money for charity. So yeah, I know, without mentioning his name, but yeah, that's a good charity. That's probably one of the good aspects, I would say, of Christianity. You get philanthropy behind it. Obviously you always get the horror stories of, money laundering and nefarious actions, but the organizations like that, just helping out special needs and handicapped people, stuff like that is always something on my mind.
And what was the name of that charity one more time?
It's called Speed for Need.
Speed for Need. All right, there'll be a link in the show notes if anyone wants to look into that and give away all that money. Jacob, we did it. This is fun. Thank you for coming on to the podcast and talking about stuff. I hope we can do this again at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this was a great experience. It was a lot less nerve-wracking than I thought. I didn't stutter too much. So
You did great. You did great. So thanks for coming on, and thank you, listener, for stopping by. If you'd like to learn more about this podcast or other work I'm doing, go to thecultofchristianity.com. If you'd like to support this podcast, listen, follow, share, and consider subscribing for $5 through Spotify for additional content, or give as much or as little as you can to support this work through links in the show's notes. Every dollar helps further this important discussion as well as start other exciting projects. Thanks for listening, and remember to keep love in your life, hope in your heart, and searching in your soul.